Welcome, IT changemakers, to the Dex Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. We're back. It's Reality Bytes. We've got the full crew today. And look, we hope we are now out of May officially. At least when you hear this, we will be out of May officially. And we hope you really did enjoy our month of NextThink and Dex anniversary celebrations during May. But look, if you also think enough about NextThink already, that's also fair enough, listeners. And we will, Tim and I on the Deck Show and here on Reality Bytes, be turning our attention once more outward to the wider world around us and the wider space. So we've got some amazing guests coming up. So keep your eye peeled for that. And we will be turning our attention to slightly less NextThink specific topics as well here on Reality Bytes, which leads me to today's discussion topic, which is about the question of value in IT. Quite a thorny one, Tim, don't you think? But just value in general. As a marketeer, I think it sometimes makes me nervous. I don't know about you.
Yeah, as an IT person, it makes me nervous too. I've lived either on one side or the other of either justifying value to purchase or justifying value to sell, and it's a tricky conversation.
Indeed it is. And, I don't think we're necessarily going to run into too much controversy, but it's an interesting topic. Looking forward to getting stuck into it. Brought to us by you, Oriana. And I think the theme occurred to you because you've been speaking to some customers about that tension between, and we do hear about this a lot actually, between investment and the need to cut costs. The paradox of spending money to save money effectively. So set this up for us, please, Oriana. What are the customers you've spoken to encountering right now, and what are the main fault lines in this discussion look like?
Yeah, I've had some really interesting conversations and heard a number of great perspectives on this recently, and so I thought it would be fun to discuss. I'm sure all of us are super familiar, perhaps even really tired of the refrain of doing more with less that people have been hearing, I think, a lot, especially in recent times, with organizations feeling pretty significant financial squeeze and therefore some demands to cut costs. But one of the things that I've heard in speaking to customers is that it's never just about cutting costs, right? It's about how do we reduce our spending in smart ways without creating greater costs down the line? How do we keep the bigger picture in mind and also invest in ways that will help our organization to succeed? And that balance, I think, is really a significant tension for a lot of organizations. I've heard from a number of people that there are organizations facing significant challenges as a result of downsizing and then having just not enough resources for the types of goals that they want to accomplish. And then, of course, how do you figure out where to invest more effectively? Do we hire more people? Do we reassign people? There's upsides and downsides to all of these strategies, right? Hiring costs money, reassigning people requires reshuffling resources. There's some benefits sometimes when you want to give people room for growth internally, and they may have relevant experiences, they may know your organization, but there are still challenges to cross-training as well as upskilling. And then there's, of course, hiring tools, right? Are there tools that will fill in the gap? Will this tool increase our efficiency, help us meet our goals? Or will it require more people resources to implement, to figure out how to get that into place, right? There's getting people up to speed, and then there's getting tools really running and setting up processes around them. So everything takes both money and time. And so figuring out where to do that and what will be effective is, I think, a really major challenge. And then the last component that goes along with all of that I've heard a lot about recently in particular is communicating with stakeholders. So when it comes to making these decisions, there's a lot of big questions people have, right? Like, will this fill in a gap? What resources will it require? Whether that's training a person or implementing a new tool or process. And then how do we not just evaluate that, anticipate that, but how do we communicate that to everybody who needs to be involved, whether it's people on the business side, who holds the financial decision, things like that. So I think there's so many different elements, right? There's the technical implementation, there's the communication and selling, pitching a particular solution. And all of those require always a balance between these competing goals.
Absolutely. And Tim, is that balance as old as IT, do you think, or is it something? I mean, it obviously is a dynamic that has existed as long as IT has existed, I suspect. But is it something that's intensified over recent years, and if so, why?
Yeah, I think it's changed, and I think intensified is probably the right word. I think to start, I was trying to figure out how to put this in some kind of a logical order, but I think we can start by saying that, we tend to group IT as just one group, one team. When we look at IT operations, the teams that are tasked with keeping the lights on, they're not a revenue generator typically. They're overhead, right? I worked at an insurance company in IT. I'm not selling insurance. I'm not developing and buying and deploying insurance software. I'm keeping the lights on in technology. So any investment that we make in IT operations, the returns aren't measured in growth or revenue. They're measured in savings. What will I invest to save money? So if we look at it in that perspective, in years past, software was a perpetual license. I would justify it, and then I would purchase it, and I would own it. So it was a bigger commitment and investment. And in many cases, I don't know if it's a common terminology, but we used to call it throwing bodies at the problem. It's almost easier to bring in contractors or even people as employees because they're an operational expense. They can change from year to year. It's easier to upscale and downscale people than it is software because you're not purchasing it long term. But SaaS, I think, software as a service and subscription specifically, changed the dynamic because now software is almost disposable. I can justify it in the short term for a year or two, and then I can shut it off because I didn't make a long-term investment. So I think the value that people get out of software subscriptions needs to look we need to change how we think and look at it longer term and not just look at it as a year over year disposable asset. Because here's the problem. You can upscale and downscale with people and onboard people relatively easily, but changing software products, changing what you've implemented on a yearly or bi-yearly or every other 2, 3, 4 years, changing that is difficult. You've got to retool, you've got to re-educate, you've got to re-operationalize. So subscription, I think, made it easy for people to take a short-term view to our detriment. I think we've got to look at a longer-term view, even though the financial commitment is shorter term.
That is such an interesting point about the growth of SaaS and how that impacts the picture. And with regards to whether we still say throwing bodies at things of a problem, I don't know, but it makes you sound like a mafia boss, and I think we still should say that regardless. But I mean, what is the general the risk, as it were, of being too short-term orientated in general here?
I think it's getting on a treadmill. I was, and my leadership team at Harvard as well, we're always really leery of subscription software because you're getting on a treadmill. You've got to pay that cost year over year. You get into this place where you're tunnel visioned on just a 1 year budget. And when you start looking at that as budget line items as savings opportunities, you're now cutting into the bone, right? You brought these capabilities in to perform, and as Ariana said, they're brought in to become more efficient, operate more efficiently. And when you start cutting your efficiency, you actually spend more money because you're becoming less efficient. And at a certain point, there's nothing left to cut, right? We used to say this all the time, you can't cut your way to profitability. At a certain point, there's nothing left and you've got to run your business. So the risk really is just in that turmoil and chaos, the year-to-year justifications, the potential year-to-year change in how you operate, the turmoil and having to continuously do ROIs and justify that budget line item. It's the short-termism, in my view, is just equates to chaos.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Dina, honing in specifically on DEX, would you describe DEX as a technology or an approach in which investment inherently leads to cost savings? Is it more complicated than that, where it does provide cost savings? With some illustrations.
Yes. So looking at DEX, generally, DEX as a concept is not new to IT, right? In its application and in the current format, after adopting the digital transformation more than before in the recent years, DEX became the hottest topic after that and the most logical step to adapt to the dynamic world of IT and the work life integration that we have right now. Like Tim was mentioning earlier, it would having applications on prem or just purchasing the applications for life before was kind of unavoidable. But right now, you can have an application for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then maybe change to another one or even change to another subscription model after that. So can you use DEX or have DEX in mind that could lead you to cost savings? Yes, for sure. Whether it's going to be cost avoidance, cost redistribution, or cutting down on the spending altogether, right? So, um, based on the persona, based on how people are using the applications, how often they are using the applications, all of that could be customized. And now looking at DEX, it could be customer oriented service, not just the technology oriented support that we used to be doing back in the days. So, how can we save some cost using DEX? And I'll just blabber on some examples. We can do sustainable IT or asset management based on the usage, not the age of the device, not the age of the application itself, or how famous is the application. Everybody's using X and everybody's using Y, so let's just have it. So we can add help and add another layer of, let's say, a checkpoint that could help IT people to make better informed decisions in real time, to be accommodating to what the customers are actually, or their users are actually needing and using the application for. We can reuse licenses or do license reclamation of the unused licenses from employees who are no longer in the company, who are not using the application as often, turn some of the devices or apps that we are constantly using, but maybe not on day-to-day basis with all of the personas, into hot disks or hot seats, which is going to help us save licenses, save devices, and that could be all spun up on a virtual device, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So these are just simple examples on how we can apply cost savings in real life right now. And we need to remember what cannot be measured cannot be controlled. And with a DEX-focused organization, of course, that is possible and really applicable in real life.
Excellent. Nobody, I mean, when it comes to what customers are experiencing, Megan speaks to as many customers as anybody on the call. Maybe excluding Tim, Megan. He's always flying around the world to customers.
I was going to say, I think maybe Tim might have me
Yeah,
beat.
I think he's got you. That's right. Yeah. So I take that back. But maybe second place on the panel is Megan. Megan, when it comes to questions of value in IT more generally, have you come across any customer stories recently that illustrate interesting examples of IT addressing the question of value in organizations head on in terms of their internal communications or measurement?
Yeah, actually, as I'm listening to this conversation, especially what Tim was saying about sort of the hidden cost of changing your subscription every couple of years because it's not working, it did make me think of a conversation I had recently with a customer. Unfortunately, I can't name by name, but they're in the engineering space. And they had this software that was like a project management tool that all their engineers were using for 2 years, had been causing huge problems for them. Like that, I think the software just, was bugging out, was crashing, was slow, just wasn't working. And they're a slim operation, a lean operation, trying to grow their revenue by, billions of dollars over the next 5 years. And so these holdups, this productivity holdup for engineers was slowing down product development. It was slowing down manufacturing, slowing down the business. in a way that I think, business leadership understood, like, this is a real problem for us. This is not just a piece of software that's annoying. Like, they could really see this was an issue. So this IT team started looking for solutions, and they were considering NextSync as a possible solution, right? To try to figure out, how do we fix this? Because they, I think, recognized that, sure, we could just remove this application and look for a new project management tool. But the time it would take to train everybody up on a new piece of software, get everybody onboarded and as fluent in it as they were in the existing software, was going to just cost way too much. So they actually identified this as one of the issues they wanted to solve or look into during their POV with us. And through the visibility that NextThink gave them, that a DEX tool can give them, to speak more ambiguously, they were able to kind of spot the issue, and that the issue wasn't actually on their side, it was on the vendor side. And they took that data to the vendor and finally got the vendor to admit, okay, yeah, this is actually on our side. Vendor updated their instance on the back end, and the issue went away. And so that, because that business values their engineers' time, they were able to put like a dollar sign to it and say that they save $340,000 a year in engineering time. Like, that's how much money the business was losing because the engineers couldn't work. And I thought that was an interesting way to attach value, because it wasn't specific, like, oh, we removed this many licenses. Each license cost X number of dollars, so we saved $200,000. It was the business was really willing to value their employees' time and saw how the employees' time connected to business productivity, to revenue. And so, the IT team was able to say, well, we fixed this piece of software, so it equates to that much money. And then they justified, buying NextSync. So I thought that was a cool story. And I think it kind of illustrates what Tim was talking about the cost of, like, it would have been too expensive for them to just get a new project management tool. That was not a solution they were willing to consider. And because they were a lean team, like to Oriana's point, they couldn't just throw more people at the problem, because they're not trying to hire a ton of people. They want to keep their team small. So, an investment in NextSync actually led to more savings over time.
I like it. Tim, since you are the real customer king here, any kind of, that whole nexus Megan describes there in a specific instance between value, productivity, and technology. Any other kind of first-hand accounts that come to mind that would sort of illustrate the same kind of dynamic?
I think it's an ongoing place that IT can continue to look at, because IT has been so inefficient for so long, right? You look at a single product to come in and do a single thing, but when there are such diverse use cases, looking at problems in other infrastructure rather than swapping it out, look for root cause, right? Look for areas in your infrastructure where you can invest and find problems in other areas, including how people operate, right? How do we get more efficiency out of our IT teams? How do we allow them, like we said at the very outset of the call, how do we allow people to do more with less? It's a great kind of verbal tagline, but in practice, how do you actually do it? You need more capability to do more with less. So there's plenty of areas to explore in IT where you can create efficiency versus just swapping something out.
Excellent. And Sean, we've heard discussion already about the question of training and upskilling in this area and in IT teams. You, of course, spearheaded the DEC certifications, and wondering thereby, in terms of ROI for businesses investing in upskilling their teams, what are your thoughts or perceptions in this area specifically?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just across the board, outside of IT, well, IT included, a couple of stats I looked at from Society of Human Resources Management and Glassdoor. It's always better to try and upskill. So the cost to hire a new person averages around $4,000 versus about $1,000, a little over $1,000 to train somebody or upskill them. Time to hire could take as long as 42 days. This is probably longer now in 2024. I've seen cost of replacing an employee can be substantial, sometimes to 6 to 9 months of the employee's salary. And you have to imagine too, for like higher positions, executive positions, those can cost up to 213% of their salary. I've seen from a few sources. I think specifically speaking to IT, this is a group of people who like to geek out on certain aspects of their profession. So I almost feel like when you can, try to upskill, and it's definitely the right people who want to do that. I think anyone in general gets bored at a job if you don't feel like you're evolving and growing year to year. But I can understand when you're talking about technology tools and who's going to be able to actually use the thing properly and understand it. That's a different problem. But yeah, my gut reaction is, when in doubt, try to work with the folks you already have and see if they're willing to evolve and train up.
Excellent. And Oriana, then, you brought us this topic, so I think the last word here should go to you. And I'm interested in the broader sense. I'm interested in your broadest kind of perception of this, which is, how should excuse me, how should IT be defining the idea of value in 2024?
I think there are sort of three core challenges and goals that I think I hear people talking about too, I think are most effective. One of which is the transition from operational to strategic. And this ties back to what Tim was saying right at the beginning, right? So this idea of you can sacrifice in the short term, but that can cause problems in the long term. So really understanding, okay, what are our operational goals and what are our strategic goals? What do we want to accomplish in the long term? And in terms of defining those goals, the more sort of long-term value, there's this question of measuring impact, right? And again, two components to this, which is one, building the right thing and building it for the right people. This is something that we talk about a lot in my field, which is you need to make sure that what you're setting up works, but also that it's working for the right people. So is your process really focused on the people who are going to be implementing it and the people who it's supposed to serve, right? So when you're trying to figure out how to measure impact, how you're going to define value for your organization, you need to look at both of those things. And then the other is both process and results. And coming up with an organizational definition of value needs to have goals for both process and for results. And I think that I would add one more thing to that, which is a very big challenge with defining value at organizations is that often we use the same metrics to understand, are things working, and to set goals and targets. So for example, is this how you're going to get your bonus? And this is always challenging because it can create perverse incentives. And I know that this is one of my favorite soapboxes, so I won't spend too much on it. But I think when you define value, you have to be really clear on making sure that you are setting metrics that you can measure and making sure that they measure what you want them to measure and not incentivizing working towards the metric, right? So this is sort of this idea of like teaching to the test.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we are setting goals for value that genuinely incentivize strategic impact rather than creating a situation where people need to make those short-term decisions in order to achieve whatever benchmarks have been set for them.
Excellent last words, Oriana. Thank you so much for bringing us the topic as well. And look, listeners, I know at the top of the discussion, I did make a slight apology for quite how much NextThink-centric content there was across the anniversary month of May. But if you did find yourself tuning out at all, please do go back at least to the fantastic interview Tim and I conducted with NextThink founder and CEO Pedro Bedos, which came out last week. Absolutely phenomenal look at the future of AI and DEX. If you're interested in the real nitty-gritty of that topic, you will get so much value out of that long, very, very interesting discussion. So please go back and listen to that if you missed it for any reason whatsoever. And maybe relevant to the discussion today is the DEX certifications that Sean has overseen, and that I mentioned earlier in the discussion. We talk about cost of upskilling on this discussion. Well, these are all completely free. Be one of the many hundreds of people who've gone onto the Dex Hub and taken a Dex certification and got a certificate and shared it on social media and hopefully learned something and helped to progress their career free of charge also. So just leaves for me to thank everybody on the panel and yourselves for tuning in, and we will see you all in 2 weeks' time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.